So what I didn't realize from the work on financial exploitation was the outcomes of it. We often want the fiscal recovery, right? What we hope to do is return them to a level and quality of life that would be more acceptable to them, restore to them autonomy as much as we possibly can. And what I didn't realize was by reporting that or by intervention of family finding out that many of the older adults who frankly made a mistake, paid very dearly for that and lost their autonomy and had many decisions questioned, cars taken away, uh, not because they couldn't drive, but because they made a bad decision.
Welcome back to the NCA podcast, Conversations on Aging and Justice, and our series, The Evidence Exchange. In this episode, we're exploring how careers in elder justice take shape through the lens of mentorship. Dr. Pamela Teaster and Ruthann Froberg reflect on how mentorship, collaboration, and a shared commitment to older adults have shaped their careers in the broader field. Dr. Pamela Teaster is a professor and the director of the Center for Gerontology at Virginia Tech. Dr. Teaster's areas of scholarship include the abuse of older and younger vulnerable adults, guardianship, end-of-life decision-making, ethical treatment of older adults, public policy, and public affairs. She's published over 250 scholarly and translational articles, reports, and book chapters, and is the editor-author of 7 books. Ruthann Froberg is a PhD student in the Human Development and Family Science program at Virginia Tech. Her research interests include elder mistreatment screening practices in clinical settings, life course development, and sexuality in older adulthood. Ruthann is also a research associate at the Education Development Center and a key member of their National Collaboratory to Address Elder Mistreatment team. We hope you enjoyed this conversation.
I'd love to hear about what first drew you to this work. You spent a lot of your career studying, I think, not just elder mistreatment itself, but in a holistic way. Kind of what is the context for it? What does it mean? And, just a lot of the decision making around that. What drew you to that work?
Well, I appreciate you asking, Ruthann, and it's also interesting to me that I'm at the place where it's that kind of question now for me. But I'll tell you what it was, and it never stopped being, was this confluence of my interest in aging and government and governance, ethics, and that it was a complex issue that was quite ambiguous. And so all that together, believe it or not, occurred when I was a graduate student, and I realized that surrogate decision-making and right treatment or mistreatment of people, end-of-life work, what the government could do or not do in those realms, all that sort of came around at that time that I was a doctoral student, and that was just for me, and it just never has stopped being. So really what I started doing as a doctoral student, I've really never stopped doing. Now, when I'm thinking about you've already established a pretty interesting career trajectory, and so tell me how you have built these amazing bridges as a person, sort of at an early point in your work life between research, policy, and practice. So what got you into this?
My motivation's always been very personal for me with this work. My interest in aging issues started because of my grandparents. I saw 3 of my grandparents go on very different journeys with dementia, starting in my high school years. And I saw that journey continue for many years. For some, it's still going. Some had passed away. And I also saw my family go through very different caregiving journeys for each of them. And all of that really was a big paradigm shift for me about how the process of aging is, how the process of dementia works, what that means for the family. And so that really got me interested in issues around aging. And as I continued to explore that, both in my undergrad and my master's and now my PhD, I've really figured out, it's not answering that question about how to navigate, I would say, the aging process, both the individual and the family, and the society. It's not just a research question. It's not just a policy question. It's not just a practice question. It needs all of those things. Um, Really, aging is a really complex process, and elder mistreatment is a really adverse, complex outcome of just some of those interactions. I really have seen my work at hopefully the intersection of kind of that research, policy, and practice, really kind of touching on all those things. Um, which I think the great thing about the elder mistreatment field is how collaborative it is, how multidisciplinary it is. And I think that on a personal level also clicked with me too, because that's what I was seeing. I was seeing that was complex. I was seeing that you needed a little bit of everything to address this issue. You've also experienced that multidisciplinary nature, that kind of collaborative experience over the past several decades working on this issue. What did you think the work would be when you were a doctoral student? And then how's it changed? What has it turned out to be now?
Well, when I think back to the late 90s and my doctoral work, I probably had no idea where it would take me. I really had no idea. I just knew it was an interesting road to walk and sometimes run down. I was just so blessed and fortunate to have this going on at that time. Was Virginia did not have a system of public guardianship. It was a sheriff's, and it was grounded in English common law. Well, that system was wholly inadequate for the complexities that had occurred over time when guardianship now was not older women or people seeking a divorce that their husbands would then get a guardianship for. Um, and so all this was sort of bouncing along as I was moving through my doctoral program. And just by honestly being open to people I met, they sort of guided me in this particular way. And so I got involved in the legislative work and the policy building and the research that went in to establishing a system of public guardianship in Virginia. Now, I don't know if that was going to happen. Like, all my studies would have told me that it was going to take a decade for this all to come to fruition. But would you believe I defended my PhD in February of 1997, and public guardianship became law in 1997 and then went into effect in 1998. Well, that was huge to be involved in that as a student and then as a very early professor to help write that law and go to talk with legislators and see how that got done. And so to have had that happen was such a huge win early in my career that I just curious about where things would go. Another thing that I wasn't really sure what it turned out to be, but I knew it'd probably be very cool was I had a mentor who was working at the Virginia Department of Social Services in the APS world. Her name, I think she won't mind me saying it, was the fabulous, amazing, still alive and kicking Joy Duke, who's now in her 90s. And she really encouraged me to look at elder abuse and adult protective services. She was along with the public guardianship work, but she is the one who encouraged me to look at the sexual abuse of older adults. That was some early work that we did on that here in Virginia, which then turned out to be an NIA grant. I worked with Holly Ramsey Klosnick, worked with Karen Roberto, and then that just opened all these doors. And then Joy was moving off, but on the nominating committee for what was then the National Committee for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. And she went, "Why did I put you on that?" And I went, "What do you have to do?" And she went, "Not so much." And I thought, "Except you'll get to know Rosalie Wolf." And I thought, "Isn't she like the woman?" Which of course she was. And so she put me on the National Committee for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. And then at the same time, Erica Wood, who was at the American Bar Association Commission on Law and Aging, was working on guardianship. She's happened to be in Virginia. And I guess she convinced Nancy Coleman to put me on the as a commissioner for the ABA Commission on Law and Aging. And that, of course, opened all these doors to the most amazing people doing that work in the country just by probably luck, frankly. I didn't know where that was going to take me, but I sure knew if I was in the company of those people, it would take me somewhere and it'd probably be very, very, very interesting. I think if you say yes more than you say no and you stay open to those sort of things, you don't know what it'll turn out to be. Sometimes you're really surprised about it, but it'll turn out to be something. And sometimes you'll wish it didn't, but in many instances, you'll be surprised that it did. So even to this day, um, now, golly days, almost 30 years later, I'm still so amazed and pleased that I could have been along for the ride for the public guardianship programs in Virginia because it helped me then do the national work on this and international work on that later in my career, as well as the elder abuse work. I think I'd have to put in a plug for we had no idea when we did the early work on the MetLife mature market work that we did on financial exploitation of older adults, and that was with John Migliaccio, Karen Roberto, Bob Blancato. We had no idea that it would change law and get in the congressional record and be used as the foundational number that other people then refined about how much people were being exploited. So, we had no idea it was going to do that then, but I'm sure glad it did, and then it just led me to get to work with these fabulous people, and I hope it never stops. So, enough of me. Tell me about you. What's been the biggest surprise?
I was not expecting when I started working in this area how collaborative and how interconnected all the different researchers and practitioners could be. And also, I think that speaks again to the complexity of looking for elder justice, of addressing elder mistreatment, that it is a really complex issue and it requires the involvement of a lot of different disciplines, of the law, of APS, of researchers, of social workers. And that collaboration was something I really didn't expect. That multidisciplinary involvement was something I really didn't expect. I think I've really learned a lot, both from you and also being in the field about collaboration and involvement and working with other people. But that was a skill that I think I've very much developed because of the work I have to do. And I think along with that, something I've really enjoyed collaborating with you, and I heard that in when you talk about your involvement with guardianship and the work you do on sexual abuse and different issues, you're so curious. There's not really any closed off issues or research questions for you. There's always something new that you want to learn about, and that leads you to working with new people and learning about a different aspect of something that you maybe hadn't considered before. Um, I think a little bit, we're working on this project around older adult gambling with VCU, and that's another one of just you had a conversation with a colleague and you both learned something new from each other and thought, well, you know what we should do about this? We should do a pilot study and look into why problem gambling is specifically an issue for older adults and why it's not covered that much, why it doesn't get a lot of attention. And it just kind of happened. And I really appreciated that you are just living and breathing that every day and showing me how to do that even more. And it's just been such a lovely surprise and such a lovely part of learning about all this. You've worked and sat with some really big issues around dignity and autonomy, agency for older adults and older adult rights. What have you had to learn or unlearn as you've researched those issues?
Well, I loved hearing your answer previously, but what have I learned is will sound pretty simplistic, that I've got a lot to learn. That's what I've learned, and I think that really to stay very humble about what I don't know, and that while I think I could be pretty sure about certain things, there'll be something about something that we'll do that will be just so wholly surprising and gobsmacking. Even when it's not the big national study, but maybe it's a more localized study, there'll be something to learn from that that will be a thing like, I didn't realize that. And here is a case in point example. So I was working with a junior faculty member who was doing some work on financial exploitation, qualitative interview study, and very proudly, I will say, yet I had very little to do with the direction or the creation of it, became a play that was about financial exploitation, which I think is a wonderful way to get the word out rather than continually talking about older people and handing them a sheet or giving them a presentation about the things to look at. I think we've got to get more creative about that. And I was so proud to be involved with that particular set of work. This is the next thing I'm running after. So, what I didn't realize from the work on financial exploitation was the outcomes of it. We often want the fiscal recovery, right? What we hope to do is return them to a level and quality of life that would be more acceptable to them, restore to them autonomy as much as we possibly can. And what I didn't realize was by reporting that or by intervention of family finding out that many of the older adults who frankly made a mistake, paid very dearly for that and lost their autonomy and had decisions questioned, many decisions questioned, cars taken away, uh, not because they couldn't drive, but because they made a bad decision or they were lonely and were victims of a romance scam and still couldn't believe that would be the case. And so, um, I think it's that there's a surprise. A lot of times there's a surprise ending in a lot of the research we could do. And if you wall off and think the less consequential studies might not have a lot to offer, or they'll be very confirmatory of what you know, they might not be. And they might lead you to the most interesting next thing, right? If you dare go down that path. And the curiosity, I think, will be the reason you'll do it. Now what? Now what should we do about that? I think that I have a lot to learn is true, uh, for that. And then the other one is more recently, just because I'm able to do it now, is to work internationally. That, we're very United Statesian, and I certainly wasn't most of my training, and golly, that's enough to work on. But the truth of the matter is, there's some things that can be learned and adopted from other countries. For example, my involvement with Susan Summers and the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse has helped me move a little internationally in the work that we do so that they don't call it guardianship in Germany, but some of the similar supported decision making that's going on in the German system, the safeguarding issues that are going on in Scotland and England, those are less severe protections than we adopt in the United States as a result of abuses that can happen or impairments that can occur. And we've got a lot to learn from them, but the issue is you got to build those relationships. But those networks, again, have allowed me to continue to evolve in that way. So tell me what you've learned so far or started rethinking and how best we can promote and support older adults, which we are either becoming or will be at some point if we're fortunate enough.
I've actually been thinking about this a lot because, as you know, Pam, I'm working on preparing for my exams. So I've been down rabbit holes and stuff with a lot of research. The thing that I feel like I've learned about the most, especially that I've been thinking about more recently, is the role of ageism in shaping the experiences of older adulthood, and also the experience and perception of elder mistreatment. And I have a quote because I keep getting stuck on it. I came across it during my prelim readings, and it's by the sociologist Dale Danifer. And he was saying in one of his articles, when an idea or a phenomenon that is social in origin is assumed to be an inevitable aspect of human nature, it is an idea that requires deconstruction. And I thought about that. And I thought about when I initially observed my grandparents, when I saw all of these really complex scenarios playing out with caregiving and dementia. And I think about myself at a younger age, I really had a lot of very firm beliefs about what older adulthood was, and that it was set, that it was inevitable, that it was biological, what was happening. And as I've thought about that, as I've worked more in this field, as I've gotten further in my education and my research, I've really started to unlearn some of that and have grown in the belief that a lot of the aspects that we think of, that we kind of default to with older adulthood, that a lot of them are socially constructed, that a lot of them are not necessarily inevitable, but that we have systems that reinforce certain stereotypes of older adults, or we have systems that do not provide support in older adulthood that could really make it a much more fulfilling stage of life. And so I think one of the biggest things that I've learned is just how ageism can shape a society. and how it can give it a color about what to expect out of older adulthood. And I think that can really shape our work and what interventions seem feasible for preventing elder mistreatment or intervening in elder mistreatment, and what don't seem feasible because we think that won't, if you have the mindset that older adulthood is inevitably full of harm, it's full of lack of utility, it's unfulfilling by nature, that's a very different mindset than it can be fulfilling, it can be rewarding, we can have good lives in older adulthood. So let's put systems and programs in place that support that. And that's a very different mindset. And I think that's the biggest thing I've learned, kind of taking that quote to heart and really thinking, or how do you deconstruct those ideas, those conceptions I had, and how do you think a little differently? How do you think, well, what are the components that have really gone into that belief, and what can we do to kind of reframe that for a broader audience and for more older adults? So that's what I've been thinking about a lot. And again, the prelims. So that's what's been going into my head a lot. You've had a lot of opportunities to reflect about the work that you've done over the years. And yeah, you've had a lot of opportunities to share your thoughts about what you hope for the future, what you've done in the past, what you're doing now. But what's a question that you wish people would ask you about your work but almost never do?
This was a very interesting question. I actually had to give it a little time, a little
Yeah.
percolation time to think about how to answer it. I hope you won't laugh too much, but the one that I wish people would ask and almost never do is how the theater influenced my present work. You're probably not surprised about it, but, and I changed where it was even on my CV so it was more central to the first page. And I moved it up because I thought it was such a good conversation starter, and it turned out to be such a great vehicle for education about these very topics that we had. So I've been in videos about guardianship. I've been in shows about elder abuse. I've written them. I've directed them. Less now, but more in the beginning. But I guess that's the one that I think would be the most fun that I wish people would ask about is how the theater influenced the work I do and how it still does, because every once in a while I go, that's a documentary. That's a documentary we want to do. And so I'm still out there thinking that because I think that arts background has been so influential in the way I think about things, the curiosity, if you say, and how it continues to drive presentations I give. And like you have quotes, I just love them because of that, because it's full of them. I thought that was a tough one to answer, but what about you?
I had to sit with this one a little bit as well. This is my best shot at it, I guess. I think something around how we make older adulthood something to look forward to. I think a lot of the questions I discuss and get asked around elder mistreatment are very, very important. We need to get the information out there about how to address it, what the signs of it are, why it's such an important issue to address. But I also thinking about what I've learned about ageism and the role, there's such a great fear of becoming old. And I've gone through that too. I've had my moments of that, especially, fresh in kind of the diagnosis stage and seeing some of the changes my grandparents went through. I felt that reactivity to the idea of being old. And I see that in various interactions. It comes up in language about senior moments or the way people behave, or there's this fear of older adulthood that I think comes up more often than maybe we want to talk about or think about. I'd love to talk to more people about how can we make it something to look forward to, because I think it can be a good stage, it can be a fulfilling stage. So we've talked a lot about your work, the research that you've contributed to the elder justice field, um, to just look at different types of elder abuse and how you've really built up that evidence base. And you and I have talked a lot about the future of the field and just other issues that are on the horizon. So as we're wrapping up now, what do you wish someone had told you when you first started this work?
So I think these last 2 questions were the hardest ones of this set for this podcast. So I had to sit with this one too. One was how to distinguish this problem from other problems that are occurring out in the world. What makes this the unique problem that one you're going to spend your time addressing? Why must attention be paid to elder mistreatment versus the other issues and problems that are egregious and exist in the world? And how to craft the argument that way so it doesn't problematize aging and hence contribute to the body of ageism that we have to deal with in trying to resolve this very issue. And then the other one I think has come up, but just to say, I wish people had told me to be just open to working with a lot of different people. And I'd have to quote Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson because I keep this little notepad I have of hers. And I like it. And here was the phrase that I keep on it. I have a seat at the table and I'm ready to work. And so it was the issue that, I guess we face all the time when we were with different people in different professions. Maybe it's the imposter syndrome or whatever. It's okay to be at the table and bring your skill set to it, right? And see what you all collectively can put your heads together and do for the betterment of humanity with the time you got to strut and fret on this earth. That's it. So what would you tell somebody? Because you are very early and you are moving through very well with your doctoral work, and there's a whole future out there of unguessed wonders. So, what advice would you give to somebody entering the field?
Network, 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 network. And it's not for the job necessarily, but it's for the collaborators. It's for the partners. It's to gather information about addressing this issue. I've been very, very lucky through you, through other work opportunities I have, through other education opportunities, to be able to go to Gerontological Society of America's annual conference, to the Hampton Symposium that happens every couple of years, to other regional conferences as well. And they have been such great opportunities to hear about this field that's relatively small, but is so robust and so collaborative. And I've learned so much from conversations with other peers and other mentors and other people who have contributed to this. I've learned more about what work is being done, how that changes my thinking, how that can really reframe or crystallize research ideas I have, and how that can complement other work going on, other knowledge that is being produced. So I think just networking, having those conversations, meeting people, that's one of my biggest pieces of information for someone who's joining this field. And I think kind of going along with that, find your collaborators. It doesn't have to be a small group necessarily. Finding the people who you can do the research with, who you can learn about things with, and make a lot of collaborators, form a lot of different teams and work on this issue. Um, and then something not entirely related, but I think about it in combination with this question just because I've learned so much about both of these things from you, Pam. I think you've helped me with my collaborations and with my network and expanding both of those kind of skill sets. You and Dr. Roberta, you both have taught me a lot about paying it forward. Not necessarily taking all the credit in the room in a sense, but leaving space for another generation, for new people in the field or new colleagues, not necessarily junior colleagues, just new folks who are entering the room. And you've taught me a lot by showing that generosity and that collaboration to me, investing in other folks and giving them credit for the work that they're doing, giving them an opportunity to collaborate with you. I really appreciated that. And I would tell someone who's entering the field now to look for those types of people and to also share that behavior as well, because I think it just makes for a lovely environment and a lovely field to collaborate in.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to our podcast and share it with a friend or colleague. We'll see you next time.